development in the old school was dominated by studies on reflexes. In this course, modules are organized based on themes. It is inevitable that we address the origins of movement, and here we explore a type that is the most basic and primitive of all, reflexes. We will begin by defining what a reflex is. What makes a reflex a reflex? Secondly, we will look at the types of reflexes that are typically covered by your clinicians. Nevertheless, these are reflexes that every exercise scientist should be aware of. We will then look at specific reflexes that are predominantly used for diagnosis. We will round that up by looking at the overall purpose and importance of these behaviors in the larger scheme of things. Finally, at the bottom, at the end of the chapter, they devoted a certain amount of time on stereotypies. These are not reflexes, but sometimes they could look like it. Nevertheless, they are essential early behaviors. To put everything in perspective, Clark and colleagues likened motor development as a field to that of a mountain. We work our way up to the top, where we start at the base. The most basic of all movement are reflexes. This is from birth to 2 weeks. Pre-adapted phase is from 2 weeks to 1 year. That is not to say that reflexes have ceased to exist, except that this time there are adaptive behaviors that begin to emerge. Unlike the reflexive stage, where predominantly reflexes are all that the child has. Between 1 to 7 years, fundamental motor patterns emerge. 7 to 11 years, context-specific skills. Beyond 11 years old, children approach a level of skillfulness, and then as we go through the rest of the lifespan, at some point when we get to the top, in other words, where we approach the elderly stages, movement changes in a different scenario where you compensate for the losses that begin to mount. So in the larger scheme of things, look at reflexes as the base of that mountain. Do we still have reflexes to this day as adults? Sure. That's why it is important to understand the nature of these types of behaviors. At about 65 and above, as we begin to regress, are there still reflexes there? Again, there are still. Basically, this is the landscape of movements. There are 3 elements of reflexes that define it. Number 1, at the heart of it is that it is an involuntary behavior. There is no command from a cortex or the higher centers of the brain that tells us to move in a certain way. In other words, it's an automatic response. It will have to be triggered by a stereotypic stimulus. The reason that stereotypic word is there, it means it has to be the same type of stimulus every time. It is that rigid in its definition. If there is a stereotypic stimulus, there is a stereotypic response. There are 2 types of reflexes. One of them, the early ones, available right off at birth, and some will argue even prior to birth, these are observed. Bottom line, these are called primitive reflexes. Primitive because they are there typically from the start. Then we have the more complex postural reflexes. This take a lot more time to develop, but it is amazing how this postural reflex embodies certain levels of automaticity, and yet it requires certain levels of maturation and environmental components that bring it about. Primitive reflexes. Let's start with ones that preserve our survival. Rooting and sucking typically have to do with ingestion of nutrients. Rooting is when you tickle the side of the face of the baby, and it will look for that finger or the bottle that it desires to zero in. As soon as it touches the tip of the bottle, touches the palate, another reflex is triggered, and that is sucking. As you can see, without these 2 reflexes, some atypical babies do not have these as natural behaviors. So this is where your physical therapist and your occupational therapist come and intervene. The palmar grasp reflex is one that many people are familiar with. It's a very easy reflex to trigger, where you put your finger or whatever implement you have at the base of the carpals, metacarpals, and tickle that outer periphery of the palm, and you will get a grasping response that is quite strong, that a baby can hang by a pole simply based on that palmar grasp. Plantar grasp, similarly, the same with the foot. You stimulate the base of the toes, the metatarsals, and you get a similar grasping response from the toes. The withdrawal reflex is one that when a child receives a noxious or an offending touch, either poked with a sharp object to the sole of the foot or the palm, the arm will pull back or the leg will pull back. That's the name withdrawal. We come to two other reflexes that are here represented in abbreviations: STNR and ATNR. STNR is the more complex one because it has two versions. What STNR means is symmetric tonic neck reflex. Symmetric tonic neck reflex has two versions. One involving a stimulus with a head extension, and the other with a stimulus being head flexion. They share the same characteristics, that is, the head and the arms tend to go together, and the lower extremities tend to work opposite against them, regardless of the actual stimulus, whether it is the head extension or head flexion. Always the head and the arms go in concert. Therefore, if it is the head extension version, the arms also, more specifically the elbows, extend, while the legs flex, the knee flexes. The opposite, if the stimulus is a head flexion, the elbows go with the head, so it is flexion at the elbow, flexion at the neck, and the opposite happens at the knees or the lower extremities. The legs extend. ATNR. If one is symmetric, this one is asymmetric tonic neck reflex. We will have more pictures of this asymmetric tonic neck reflex. Asymmetry, meaning the left and the right sides do not do the same thing. Okay, let's begin with the last one. Asymmetric tonic neck reflex. This picture does not describe this. These are adults performing motor skills in a sport context. The point here is, when we were babies, we have what you call asymmetric tonic neck reflex, but several researchers allude to the possibility that that reflex is the origin of a lot of movement behaviors that have now become voluntary. An asymmetric neck reflex is when the reaching side of the arm is extended, what we call face side. So you see the face side looking to that extended arm, and the back of the head side is flexed. So sometimes they call this reflex, the ATNR, as the fencer's reflex, because this is essentially the configuration of the body. Face side is extended, back of the head side is flexed. That asymmetry is reflected in the legs as well. Face side, the legs are extended. Back of the head side, the leg is flexed. Again, let me emphasize, this is a hurdler, so this is a voluntary behavior that he's doing. But the contention of some reflex scientists before is that the reflexes are carried on and just become shaped into a voluntary behavior. Asymmetric tonic neck reflex. Face side, leg side on that. Leg is extended, arm is extended to the side, is not quite visible in this picture, but on the back of the head side, arm is flexed, leg is flexed. As you can see in this badminton player about to do a smash, face side, arm is extended in front, back of the head, that racket that's he's wielding and about to smash, that is flexed. Fencer, you already know that. And this is, imagine, even in a sport of bodybuilding, classic. Think of this as a baby. The face side, the arm is extended, the back of the head side, the arm is flexed. You see it in many sport example. Could this have originated from the ATNR? Well-practiced skills such as pitching. Face side, arm is extended, back of the head side, it is flexed. Curious picture, the umpire is not even an athlete, but he is using the same sort of behaviors. Face side extend, back of the head flexed. Even the pitcher behind him, I'm actually not sure what he's doing there, but they are both reflecting the same behavior. There's one doctoral student that precisely made this juxtaposition. He puts picture of a baby side by side to that of a catcher. As the head tilts back and up to look at that fly ball, arms are extended, face side looking up, back of the head flexed. This is the ATNR. The next example is of STNR. So while ATNR is asymmetric, recall that the definition of STNR is symmetric tonic neck reflex. Arms and neck go together, head extended, elbow extended, but the lower extremities do the opposite, flexed. Long jump, neck extended, elbow extended, legs are flexed together from underneath so that they can complete the long jump. High jump, neck extension, arm, elbow extension, but the legs have to flex in order to roll over that bar. Here is the opposite stimuli, same STNR reflex, but this time, instead of a neck extension demonstration, this is a neck flexion. Probably one of the most complicated sports skills, pole vaulting. As the vaulter rides that pole up, with the pole rising out of a bend, the neck flexes. The arms again go together with the neck, flexes, elbows flex, so that they can ride up, get over the bar. The legs do the opposite this time. Extends. So flexion here, this time the legs extend to get over. I could not emphasize it more. These are complicated, multiple practiced sports skills. Reflexes are not multiple practiced. They are not practiced at all. They happen to come about as the child develops. Primitive reflexes like STNR and ATNR are there right from the get-go. No brain mechanism is involved as far as learning and practicing it. Another takeaway from this is that these complex locomotor skills seem to be facilitated by the theoretical primitive hardwired things in our bodies. In other words, they tested whether we are strongest when our bodies are in congruence with a reflex, or if we're doing the opposite of what reflexes do. Very simple. Bicep curl. If you test somebody doing a bicep curl, where are they most strong? They're going to move their head towards the arm by looking at the hand, away from the arm, or side of the arm. This is a study that's been done a long time ago in 1956, I believe, Labyrinth et al. Basically, you are strongest if you are congruent or in harmony with what the normal reflexes do. In other words, to be strong with a bicep curl with your right hand, look away from it, kind of like an ATNR, towards the extending arm on your left. Same thing with squats. When you're about to do a squat, what do they tell you? As you squat down, your trainers will tell you, look up, neck extension, arms feel like extending, and then the legs are at that moment flexed. And so again, it's an issue of congruency. Let's now discuss the more complex postural reflexes. Let's begin with what they call a stepping reflex. You guys, as students, it is very easy to find any videos of this on YouTube. Just plug in these keywords. You will see that the stepping reflex is visible between 0 to about 2 weeks old. A baby, as soon as you support the trunk, lean him a little bit forward. That's the stereotypic stimulus. The legs start stepping about, looking like it is walking, and yet it cannot even support its own weight. But it is universally observed. There is a second reflex called swimming or landau. The way this is done is you lift the baby, you support the baby from the tummy. That's why it's called swimming. It's like swimming in air. What happens is, the reason it is a postural reflex, it's not there from the get-go. It will develop across time. When you do this to a newborn infant, you support them underneath their tummy, all they're going to do is drape themselves on your arms and do nothing. They're too weak to perform any behavior, but as tone and as musculature develop, the body starts to respond in an automatic fashion. They lift their legs up, they lift their heads up, arms up, what we call with little kids the Superman position, and they start flailing about so that they look like they're swimming. In clinical books, this is referred to as the Landau reflex. Then there's the labyrinthine reflex. Labyrinthine refers to the fact that the reflex is actually based on the vestibular apparatus inside the inner ear. Structurally, it looks like a labyrinth. You get in, and there's fluid there that is used like a carpenter's level. Like a carpenter's level, it is able to detect whether the body is oriented properly relative to gravity. The reference is always the line of gravity. How do you elicit the labyrinthine reflex? Well, you can get this. You can do this with an infant either sitting or lifting them up mid-air. Hold on to their torso or lift them up. Think of Simba, the lion in Lion King. You hold it up in the air. But this time the manipulation is to lean the baby slowly either to the right or to the left. It's quite fascinating if you do this with a neonate, a newborn. You'll not get much of a response in the neck because they still do not have control. But as you lean the baby to the right or to the left, the older they get, right about 4 or 5, 6 months, they begin to have the proper orientation of skills for the head, where they're responding to your balance, your labyrinth, your vestibular system inside your inner ear, that it will align the head relative to the line of gravity. So, leaning the baby to the right, the neck counteracts so that it keeps itself firmly straight relative to gravity. Do the opposite to the left. Now, what about neck riding? Unlike labyrinthine reflex, which you stimulate or you get it out of the child from an upright position, neck riding is elicited from a lying position. On their backs, there are two versions for neck riding. Either the neck rights to the body or the body rights to the neck. Bottom line, the stimulus is either the neck or the body. Take note of the preposition on. Neck on body, body on neck. The on preposition tells you which one is the stimulus. So neck on body. The body is the stimulus and the head will right itself relative. This happens with the clinician turning over the baby using the body, typically handling him from the back of the torso or the leg and turning them over. The neck quickly recoils and follows the body in its orientation. When you have a body on neck, you know what it means, on. The neck this time is the stimulus. The clinician now testing the baby will put his hand underneath the neck and use that to stimulate or to to turn and twist, and the body now rights itself relative to the neck. Neck on body, body on neck. There is that pull-up reflex as the baby begins to have control of the neck and the arms. The arms will pull up on anything that it can catch onto. The baby's not doing the pulling up. The clinician is the one holding the hands, and he will try to pull the baby up. But if you're talking about a neonate, as you pull him up via the arms, that neck will just hang limp. It will have no control. As posture improves, control of the muscles improves, the baby starts to resist gravity. You pull the baby by the hands and pull it up, the neck starts to resist gravity, and it tries to go and pulls up against you and starts to get up. Finally, the parachuting reflex. This is what we call a protective response. If you push the baby forward towards the edge of his balance, there is a parachuting response where the arms flail in front. This happens in 4 directions. Front is what I described just now, to the right, to the left, and to the back. Doesn't matter what direction, the response is a flailing of the arms to support it, basically to prevent a fall. Parachuting reflexes are what we call protective. In the primitive reflexes, the sucking and the rooting are survival reflexes, nourishing reflex. So together, the parachuting and the survival reflexes are essential to basically protect life. So why study reflexes? Well, I've just laid out the foundation for human survival, nourishment and protection. That's covered by the rooting, sucking, and the parachuting reflex. Then in terms of simply for science and science sake, when we study dominant behaviors, and we said that in the mountain of motor development, at the very base of that are reflexes. Prior to birth and the first 4 postnatal months, basically reflexes dominate. It reveals how the human brain-body connection occurs. It's there. We might not have full explanation for it, but the fact is, it's there. As we spoke about postural reflexes, they tend to lead to more complex voluntary movement of later infancy. In other words, without these postural reflexes, we will end up not being able to perform motor skills efficiently. Finally, and this is where the clinicians step in, reflexes can be an important step in diagnosing infant health and neurological maturation. Reflexes as diagnostic tools. Let's expand on that. Bottom line, when you're talking about diagnosing reflexes or diagnosing whether a baby is on schedule or showing typical development, you look at reflexes and juxtapose them to the normal time frame. If at this point in time you expect a certain reflex to emerge, such as the postural reflexes, and they're not, possible indication of something wrong or some central nervous damage or some delay. On the other hand, if some reflexes which were supposed to have disappeared, notice I did not cover here the complex on-off schedule of certain reflexes. So far, we simply described what they are, primitive being there right from the very beginning, and postural reflexes slowly emerging. The complexity of this involves the schedule. Certain reflexes are expected to disappear after a certain time. So what happens if that reflex continues to persist? Or what if an event happens that all of a sudden reflexes that should have disappeared long ago come out again? As an example, it's not in this set of slides, but please write down the word Babinski. Babinski as a reflex is a classic diagnostic tool. For those of you who've had accidents and you totaled your car, and if you're immobilized, your EMTs are actually doing a lot of checking on your reflexes. In a Babinski, what they do is to sweep something sharp at the sole of your feet and a sole of your foot and sweep up. If you do this to the baby, the normal response is a spreading of the toes. That's a Babinski. Babies are supposed to have it, but they're not supposed to have it past the first year. So what happens to an adult who gets into a car wreck? If he starts showing Babinski, it is a telltale sign of a spinal cord being severed. So in that sense, reflexes coming back tell you that now what used to be a control from above is gone, and the floodgates are open for the old reflexes to come out, because voluntary control has gone missing after spinal cord severance. Reflexes that are lacking, weak, or asymmetrical can be indicative of something wrong with the motor cortex or with the muscle or with a delay for the development of this child. So therefore, reflexes will continue to be used by clinicians at all levels. Now, finally, towards the end of that chapter, they talk about stereotypies. Thielen, a prominent researcher for infant development in psychology and motor control, outlined a repertoire of behavior of children beyond their reflexes. To the untrained eye, some of these behaviors look like reflexes. It's as though nothing, there's no voluntary control there because it just happens. Okay? Motor blabbling is how she describes it. Put a kid on your lap, and some kids all of a sudden just bounce up and down, and you don't know what triggers it. They have a hard time classifying it as a reflex because sometimes the stereotype stimulus is not there. It could be triggered by a whole host of things. So as I said, the most common are those where the baby just almost jump up and down, the legs are going crazy. And if you lift the baby up, the baby starts kicking all over the place. So this is the bouncing one on the right and the leg kicking on the left. The reason the term motor babbling seems so very apt is that these behaviors themselves are not very functional. It's not like they serve any purpose. Oh, the kid is just having fun. But the fact is, they co-opted the word babbling. Babbling comes from phonetic development. You babble. When infants first learn languages, they babble. It's unintelligible. There's no meaning to it. But they produce a myriad of sounds as they figure out what their vocal cords can do. Well, that's why it is, it's a parallel to movement. At some points, kids just figure out what the legs can do or what the hands can do. So you have a lot of ankle and wrist circumduction and all sorts of behavior. Arm banging, hand and finger flexion. Of course they are having fun, but because of the lack of term that they could classify it, and they can't say it's a reflex, they've settled on the word stereotypies.